Hi everyone, here's part 2 of the video of explaining my process of learning the story of Lazarus. The reason why I'm walking while I'm doing this video is because this is part of the process. I've got my little earbud thing in here, and what I did the other day was record, you saw me working on the text and preparing the text, and once I'd done that, then I did a recording of the reading. And then over the next few days I've just been listening to the recording over and over again. When I drive to work, I might listen to it for a couple of times. It takes about 8.5 minutes to get through, and so each time I listen to it, I notice different things. I soak in it. I let myself sort of take in different things. If I don't really take it in, that's fine, because it's sort of like it's just becoming more and more familiar to me. The not just well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, the words themselves, the actual sound of the words and the sentences and the rhythms start to become familiar. They start to become part of my memory, like a song, like the way you remember a jingle. They just sort of get stuck in your head, and so that really helps, so that when you get to the sort of the harder process of sitting down to memorize, to commit it to memory, you're like, oh, this sounds so familiar, I know this, and you know sort of what it should sound like, and it all starts to roll off your tongue from almost muscle memory, just because you've heard it so many times. But the other thing is, you start to, when you listen to the whole thing and not get bogged down in it word for word, just trying to learn each word or learn each line, when you hear the whole thing, you start to see the bigger scope of it. You start to see the structure of it, the flow of the story, the highs and the lows, the bits where it's describing things and the bits where it's making more action, more action or more emotion, the bits where it speeds up and slows down, those sort of things. You find where the climax is, and those sort of things. You start to notice the flow. And that's really important, because for me, as I mentioned, I think in the other video, I start from the outside in. I start from the bones, the bigger structure of it, before I start looking at memorizing the words, or even thinking of it as words. I think of it as story or narrative. That's even true when I'm memorizing a passage that isn't narrative. So when I'm memorizing a passage from an epistle or something like that, or a prophecy, those passages still have a flow to them. They still have a beginning. They often still have a climax. They still have a narrative, in the sense that they are written by people to people. So there are still characters involved. There's still emotion involved. But they are trickier. Actual narrative, like a story from the Gospels like this one, is so much easier, because you can imagine it. So just from the last few listenings that I've had, and the other, I don't know if I said, but the reason why I'm doing this as I'm walking is because that's how you learn it. You just sort of, as you're traveling places, as you're walking through the park, as you're driving to work, you just soak in the story and listen to it over and over and over again. So after having listened to it for a few days, I then test myself to see if I can sort of summarize the story. And often with narratives, I summarize it basis. I start to notice the locations, the places where people travel, where the different scenes are, in a sense. So the story starts, I remember, in the location where it introduces Lazarus. Lazarus is sick, talks about his sisters, Mary and Martha, and it talks about a message going to Jesus to tell him that it's sick. So now we've got two locations. We've got the place where they are, their home maybe, and then the place where Jesus is. And I think it's Bethany and Jesus in Jerusalem. And it mentions that it's only like 2 miles separate from each other. So now I've got two places, and I'm even thinking now, when I eventually tell this, I'm going to use 2 places on the stage. So there's one side of the stage is where Mary and Martha and Lazarus live, and one side of the stage is where Jesus is. And the message goes over to them, and Jesus decides to stay there for 2 days, which is sort of really significant to the story. And then eventually he says, we're going to go back and we're going to visit them, and Lazarus has died by this stage, and they travel along, and the story doesn't immediately tell you, but actually they don't get the whole way. They're still outside of the town when Martha comes to meet Jesus. So there's a third location, a location that's still outside the town, but a meeting place. And Jesus, interestingly, he stays there and waits for Mary to come out to him. So he there's this sense of delay before Jesus actually goes to the tomb. So he has the conversation with Martha about him being the resurrection and the life. Amazing lines from Jesus. And then then Martha runs back, tells Mary, and she runs off. People think she's going to the tomb, but she's actually going out to meet Jesus. She talks to Jesus, and they go, let's go to the tomb. So then there's the tomb. So that's a fourth location. And then at the tomb, Jesus calls... first of all, at the tomb, Jesus prays. So there's a moment where he prays, and then he calls Lazarus out, and Lazarus is resurrected. So you've got, in my head, I'm breaking it up based on scenes, based on what's happening, the flow of the story, the movements, the moments, and then slowly as I can describe it in broad strokes, then I go, when I actually get to the time where I'm just going to sit down and try to learn the words, so much of it is already soaked into my head, and it makes it so much easier, and it informs how I not just remember it, but then how I tell it, which is always a part of my process, caring about how I'm going to tell the story, not just memorize it. So yeah, so there you go, part 2 of my journey, my process of learning Lazarus. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks.